This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real events. Names, dates, locations, and identifying details have been changed or dramatized to protect privacy and enhance the narrative. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental or used fictitiously. This content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not aim to glorify crime, promote violence, or pass judgment on real individuals. Viewer discretion is advised. Some scenes may contain mature, disturbing, or triggering content. What you are about to watch could have happened anywhere, to anyone. It's inspired by real events. Whispers of truth buried beneath layers of fiction. We've changed the names, the dates, the locations, but the emotions, the betrayal, the fear, those are real. This story is not meant to accuse, only to reveal, to make you question, who do you really trust? If stories like this keep you thinking, long after they end, hit subscribe, smash like, and drop your theory in the comments. Now watch closely, before the truth disappears again.
It should have been the happiest day of their lives, a day filled with promises, with music, with the kind of love people spend a lifetime searching for. Instead, it ended in silence, in the cold stillness that follows death. Rain fell on the church steps that morning, soaking the white satin of a wedding dress that would never walk down the aisle. White roses lay broken on the ground, their petals scattered like confetti for a celebration that never came. A gold wedding ring rolled across the stone floor, spinning until it fell flat, and then came the sound. Two sharp gunshots that tore through the air and ended everything. When the police arrived, the vows were unfinished. The aisle was no longer lined with flowers, but with blood. The bride and groom lay side by side, their hands almost touching, the warmth still fading from their fingers. And somewhere, in a prison cell miles away, a woman watched it all unfold on the evening news. The man she had once given everything for. The man whose crime she had carried on her shoulders. The man she thought would be hers forever. He was lying dead beside another woman. She had traded her freedom for his. She had taken the fall, believing it was love. But as she sat in that cell and saw the life he had built without her, something inside her broke. If she could not have him, no one would. 2 gunshots, a wedding destroyed, and a question that still haunts this Texas town. Was it love or was it vengeance? Jonathan Hale was the kind of man who could make a stranger feel like an old friend in 5 minutes. At 43, he ran Hale Care Systems, one of Texas's fastest-growing private healthcare companies. His name carried weight in boardrooms, on charity boards, and at political fundraisers. His charm was polished, his suits perfectly cut, his voice calm and measured. He had the kind of confidence that made people say yes before they even understood the question. He grew up in Fort Worth, the youngest son of a small-town pastor. In interviews, he liked to tell the story of starting his first business at 16, selling refurbished medical equipment out of his father's garage. By his 30s, he had moved from selling to running clinics, then building an empire. And with success came attention. From investors, from politicians, and from women. Danielle Ross met him when she was 29. She was working as a nurse's aide at a private clinic Hale Care had recently acquired. Danielle was striking, not just in looks but in presence. She had sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a laugh that could warm a room. She had grown up in Temple, Texas, the oldest of 3 sisters, raised by a single mother who worked nights as a caregiver. Money had always been tight, dreams even tighter. Jonathan noticed her within weeks of visiting the clinic. At first it was small talk in the hallways, compliments about her work. Then came lunches, then dinners. It wasn't long before she was in his downtown condo, cooking pasta barefoot in his kitchen while he poured wine. She wasn't blind to who he was, a man older, wealthier, and always busy. But she believed she saw a side of him no one else did. And in her, Jonathan found someone who listened without judgment, who told him the truth even when it was sharp, and who believed his promises without asking for proof. Their relationship was intense. Friends described them as magnetic, drawn to each other in a way that could be charming one minute and dangerous the next. Arguments came quickly, but so did reconciliations. They traveled together. They fought together. They made up in ways that made them forget the fight entirely. Then came the investigation. A quiet inquiry into Hale Care's billing practices began to swell. There were whispers of overcharging, false claims, and creative accounting. Jonathan brushed it off at first, telling Danielle it was nothing, that it would pass. But the paper trail was real, and every link in that chain pointed back to him. Danielle didn't wait to be asked. In a moment that would define the rest of her life, she told Jonathan she would take the blame. She said she could handle the time better than he could, that she had fewer people depending on her, that she loved him. In court, she signed the confession without flinching. It was her decision, her mistake, her crime. The headlines were small, the coverage brief. Jonathan Hale kept his company. Danielle Ross went to prison. At first, she believed the sacrifice was temporary. The letters came almost every week, filled with promises of waiting, of rebuilding, of a future that would be better than anything they'd had before. The phone calls were warm, his voice always steady, always assuring her that nothing had changed. But outside those prison walls, life was moving. Jonathan attended galas, charity auctions, political dinners, and then he met Rebecca Lane. Rebecca was 32, a former hospital administrator turned nonprofit director. She had grown up in Houston, gone to college in Austin, and built a career that made her a familiar face in the state's philanthropic circles. Her style was elegant without trying, her demeanor confident without arrogance. She met Jonathan at a hospital fundraiser in Dallas, and within weeks, she was seated beside him at every event. For a while, the relationship was quiet, but soon the photographs started. Rebecca in a silver gown, her hand resting on Jonathan's chest. Jonathan smiling the way Danielle remembered, but now for someone else. When the engagement was announced, it was everywhere. The ring, the date, the venue. Inside the prison, Danielle Ross stared at the headline until it blurred. The love triangle was no longer whispered about. It was public, polished, celebrated. Two women bound to the same man, one by loyalty, the other by a promise. Both believing they knew him best, both believing he belonged to them, but only one of them had nothing left to lose. Danielle's heartbreak hardened into something else. The loyalty that once kept her silent began to feed an obsession. Every day she replayed the betrayal in her mind. Every night she imagined how it would end. By the time her release date arrived, the invitations had been sent, the dress chosen, and the date set. Jonathan Hale, the man she had gone to prison for, was about to stand at the altar with another woman. And for Danielle Ross, that wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a plan. Danielle Ross stepped through the gates of Gatesville on a pale April morning. 31, 3 years vanished, one small duffel on her shoulder. The air felt too wide. The sky felt too bright. Freedom, but with a bruise under it. She told her parole officer she had a plan. She told her mother she was fine. Inside, the words dissolved before they reached her throat. Jonathan Hale and Rebecca Lane were weeks from the altar. Gold-embossed invitations. A country club hidden behind hedges and iron. 4 o'clock vows under an arch of white roses. Danielle did not call him. She did not text. She did not ask why. Answers were already everywhere. In prison, the photos had traveled faster than letters. Jonathan in a tuxedo at a gala. Rebecca in a silver gown, hand on his chest, a diamond throwing light. The caption said the word that had burned a hole in Danielle's sleep, forever. She rented a studio off a frontage road outside Waco. A bed, a hot plate, a calendar tacked to a blank wall. Day 1, she found a job at a diner off Highway 84. Cash tips, grease under her nails, coffee refills for truckers who did not learn her name. At night she drove. No radio, no hurry, just the hum of tires and the taste of metal behind her tongue. First the perimeter. She learned the back streets that fed the country club, where a car could idle without drawing eyes, where a camera pointed just a fraction too high. Her sedan was gray and forgettable, paid for in cash, no financing, no trail. She bought a prepaid phone at a pharmacy 2 towns over, activated it in a parking lot, turned off every setting that wanted to help. She drove again, slower this time. She counted entry points, measured sightlines, watched gardeners trim hedges level with a string. Late deliveries told her the schedule. Floral vans before noon, rental trucks for the dance floor after 2. Caterers on the half hour, always in a rush. Inside the diner, she learned to smile like a stranger. Outside, she learned the rhythm of a place built for celebrations. The Glock 19 came through a man who never asked for a last name. Cash folded into his palm. A box that smelled like oil and cardboard. Weight that sat easy in her hands. She drove west to a remote field where no one would come. First shot, the barrel lifted. Second shot, less. By the 5th, her grip was a memory returning to muscle. By the 10th, the sound no longer startled her. The brass landed in dry grass with a soft, metallic answer. Jonathan and Rebecca posted sunsets, laughter at tastings, a dress fitting blurred into a bridal party brunch. Every post was a window. Every smile pressed her pulse a little harder. The calendar on her wall filled with red X's. Each morning, one more line. Each night, one more line. A private metronome she could not turn off. 3 times that month, a gray sedan drifted past the club's main gate and the service road behind it. A guard jotted a partial plate in a notebook and forgot it by lunch. A camera at the gas station caught the same car at 10:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, 6:17 p.m. on a Thursday, 12:09 p.m. on a Sunday. Later, detectives would freeze those frames and circle them in red. The official report would read it plainly. Subject observed in the vicinity on April 2nd, April 6th, April 10th. Vehicle, dark gray sedan. Operator, female, unidentified. In the moment, no one cared. The club prepared for joy. No one looks for danger where vows will be spoken. Danielle learned the sound of the quartet rehearsing. Vivaldi in fragments, a false start, a laugh, silence, again. She mapped the path from the service hall to the French doors, counted paces on a whisper, marked the blind spot between 2 cameras where a person could stop and breathe without being seen. She kept her face calm. She kept her hands busy. Dishes washed, eggs flipped, orders called, grief disguised as routine. At night, the plan replayed itself until it felt like memory. Not future, memory, a thing that had already happened and was only waiting to catch up. 2 weeks out, she changed her hair. A tighter pull, less to recognize, less to touch. 1 week out, she walked the sidewalk along the hedge and timed the patrol cart's loop. 7 minutes and change. Room enough for a choice. 4 days out, she parked, engine off, and listened to the property exhale. Fountains, footsteps, a door that didn't close clean, the click of a latch with a temper. 3 days out, she stood in the bridal shop's lot across town and watched couples step into mirrors and futures. 2 days out, she drove to the cemetery and walked without looking at names. The day before, she did not drive at all. She sat on the floor, back to the bed, and stared at the square on the calendar that had no red X. Investigators would later draw the line for the jury. Cell tower pings forming a halo around the club. Gas station footage. A florist's delivery window she matched without knowing. Tiny proofs knitting into a net. But before there were exhibits, there was a woman alone in a room with her heartbeat and a plan. Morning broke on the day circled in her mind. She folded the tote's zipper closed with 2 fingers. Checked the weight once. Breath in, breath out. Door locked behind her with a small, decisive click. On the highway, the horizon looked like a choice pretending to be fate. She did not change lanes. She did not second guess. She let the city rise to meet her. Guests would begin arriving after lunch. Parking attendants in vests would wave them toward rows of painted lines. Laughter would float over trimmed hedges. A quartet would tune. Roses would open by degrees in the sun. To the world, it was a wedding day. To Danielle, it was an ending wearing white. April the 16th waited at the end of a manicured drive, and she was already counting the steps between the door she would choose and the moment everything would stop. The morning of April 16th rose clean and bright over Waco. By 7, the bridal suite at the country club was alive with movement. Rebecca Lane stood barefoot near the window, the hem of her silk robe brushing her ankles, her wedding dress hanging beside her. Sunlight spilled through the sheer curtains, pooling across the gown's satin like water. Her bridesmaids moved in and out of the room, curling hair, touching up makeup, passing glasses of champagne. A photographer crouched near the floor to capture the moment Rebecca fastened the diamond studs in her ears, her smile small but steady. She looked at herself in the mirror once, twice, and whispered something no one else heard. Across the property, Jonathan Hale stood in the groom's lounge, tie in hand, jacket still on the hanger. At 43, he had been in rooms far more intimidating than this one, but the weight of the day pressed differently. His groomsmen laughed, swapped stories, poured whiskey into short glasses. Jonathan joined in, but his phone buzzed in his pocket, a number he didn't recognize. The screen stayed dark in his palm before he slipped it away. By 9, Danielle Ross was already on the road. She'd been awake since before sunrise, coffee untouched on the counter. The Glock 19 rested in a black tote on the passenger seat, zipped closed. The sedan's tires hummed over asphalt she knew by memory now. Every bend, every uneven seam in the road. A security camera at a gas station 2 miles from the club caught her car at 9:47 a.m., the sunlight bouncing off the hood. Later, investigators would freeze the frame and circle the partial Texas plates in red ink for the jury. The country club woke in stages. Staff in black and white uniforms set tables on the lawn. Rows of white chairs lined the aisle, their backs facing a rose-covered arch. The quartet tuned their instruments, notes floating on the morning air. Jonathan took his place at the altar just before 4 o'clock. The guests stood as the music shifted into the processional. Rebecca appeared at the end of the aisle, her dress trailing behind her like a pale tide. Jonathan's smile was immediate, warm, unguarded. Rebecca's matched it. Danielle slipped through a side entrance into the reception hall. Through the French doors ahead, she could see the aisle, the couple framed perfectly in its center. She took 3 steps forward, stopping just inside the shadow of the doorway. Witnesses would later tell police they saw a woman in dark clothing move quietly toward the ceremony. One guest said, "She didn't look lost. She looked like she'd been there before." The officiant's voice carried over the music. Jonathan took Rebecca's hands. They leaned toward each other, words meant for them alone. The first gunshot cut through the air like a tear in fabric. The second came before anyone could understand the first. Jonathan staggered back, his hand slipping from hers. Rebecca fell with him, her bouquet scattering across the grass, roses rolling into the aisle. Gasps became screams. Chairs overturned. Guests dropped to the ground or ran for the hedges. The quartet's instruments lay abandoned in the grass. 2 guests lunged toward Danielle, knocking her to the ground. The tote fell open, the Glock sliding free onto the grass. Security arrived seconds later, pulling her up by the arms. Her voice was steady. "If I can't have him," she said, "no one will." Paramedics pronounced Jonathan Hale and Rebecca Lane dead where they fell. 200 witnesses, but only one who could trace every step that led there. By nightfall, detectives had begun to piece the day together. The shell casings matched the Glock. The camera at the gas station confirmed her arrival time. Cell tower records placed her phone near the club hours before the ceremony began. In the booking photo taken at the McLennan County Jail that night, Danielle's face was calm. No tears, no strain, just the weight of an ending she had planned long before the first shot. The news moved faster than the ambulance lights. By dusk, aerial shots of the country club were looping on every network in Texas. White chairs in perfect rows, a rose arch swaying in the breeze, yellow tape cutting the lawn in half like a scar. Reporters spoke into cameras with hushed urgency. A wedding turned funeral. A CEO and his fiancée gone. A former inmate in custody. The love triangle everyone thought they understood, now ending in gunfire. In the back of a patrol car, Danielle Ross stared through the glass as if the world were on the other side of an aquarium pane. No tears, no trembling. A stillness that read like acceptance. The arrest report captured what the cameras could not. Calm, cooperative, no slur to her words, no scent of alcohol. Every choice deliberate, every step accounted for. At the medical examiner's office, the quiet was clinical. Jonathan Hale, 43. Rebecca Lane, 32. Causes of death recorded with the precision of a clockmaker. 2 signatures under a fluorescent hum. Families gathered behind closed doors before the sun rose. Rebecca's mother holding the corner of a framed bridal portrait as if the glass might shatter again. Jonathan's brother speaking for the family with words that fell apart halfway through the sentence. Outside, microphones waited for grief to become sound. By morning, the headlines had a cadence you could tap with a finger. Wedding day, double murder. Bride and groom slain at altar. Ex-con, ex-girlfriend in custody. Each Chiron's certainty tightening around a story still wet with shock. Detectives began where the day ended. Shell casings on the grass. A Glock 19 bagged and tagged. Witness statements recorded in rooms that smelled faintly of coffee and paper. The gas station footage cued and frozen at 9:47 a.m. Sunlight on a gray hood. The cell tower map lit like a constellation around the country club. They traced the weeks backwards until a pattern appeared. April 2nd, April 6th, April 10th. A gray sedan turning up like a refrain. A partial plate in a guard's notebook that suddenly mattered. When the booking photo was taken at McLennan County Jail, Danielle's face held that same fixed calm. Not defiance, not remorse. A still surface over deep water. The indictment arrived like thunder that had been gathering for weeks. 2 counts of first-degree murder. Enhancements that turned the possible into the inevitable. Her public defender asked for time. The court gave a date. 6 months later, the courthouse steps were a geography of lenses and signs. Rebecca's friends held photos of her in white. The veil lifted, her eyes bright. Jonathan's employees stood in suits too new for comfort, jaws tight, hands clasped in front of them. Inside, the ceiling fans turned the air with an old rhythm as the jury filed in. The prosecution did not hurry. They unspooled the story bead by bead until the necklace hung complete. Cell tower records, gas station footage, the florist's delivery schedule, the partial plate, the Glock, and the casings it matched like teeth in a key, and the sentence that reached across the lawn and into the courtroom. If I can't have him, no one will. A detective pointed to a screen and traced a red dot along a map. A forensic analyst lifted a casing with gloved hands and spoke in a tone built to hold facts without shaking. The jurors watched. They wrote nothing down. They didn't need to. The line connected itself. The defense built a different map. They walked the jury back through Gatesville, through 3 years behind a fence topped with spiral wire. They spoke of loyalty as if it were oxygen, of a woman who traded her life for a man who promised forever, of a future that dissolved on a screen above a bunk. Betrayal given weight until it bent like iron. But the calendar on the wall would not bend. The practice shots would not blur. The quiet drives would not soften their edges. Preparation has a sound the law can hear, even beneath tears. On the second week, the court played the procession music under the testimony of a violinist who had dropped his bow when the gunshots tore the afternoon in half. His voice shook, then steadied, then fell silent. The sound hung in the room after he left the stand. Danielle watched without flinching. Her attorney leaned close twice, 3 times, speaking low. She nodded once. Otherwise, she kept her eyes forward, as if watching a scene that had already ended. Closing arguments ran like 2 rivers beside each other. One spoke of intent and inevitability, of a plan carried in the bones. The other spoke of a heart eroded until only the hardest part remained, of promises made and broken in the glare of a public life. The jury retired just after noon. They returned before the coffee in the hallway cooled. Guilty on both counts. Life without the possibility of parole. The gavel sounded like a lid set on a box. Rebecca's mother folded into her daughter's arms. Jonathan's brother stared at the floor until his vision steadied. Danielle Ross turned once toward the gallery, as if checking a clock, and then let the deputies lead her away. Outside, the microphones waited again. Words about justice. Words about loss. Words about a town that would not be the same. They lasted as long as press conferences last. And then the steps emptied, and the voices thinned, and the day became just another page in a docket. Time moved on in the way time does. The country club replaced its grass. New couples stood beneath new roses and said the same old vows. Photographers framed the same angles and captured the same light. If you didn't know, you wouldn't know. But some people always know. A server who hears Vivaldi and feels her throat close for a beat, a groundskeeper who pauses at sunset where the aisle once ran, a violinist who tightens a bow and checks the door twice before he plays. Jonathan Hale's headstone stands under an oak that drops leaves like slow rain in October. Rebecca Lane's grave is 3 rows over, where the light lingers longer in the evening. Fresh flowers appear, then fade, then appear again. Love in the quiet work of the living. Danielle Ross wakes to the same sound every morning. Doors locking, keys turning, shoes on concrete. A narrow window sets a hard line of daylight on a concrete floor. Some afternoons she sits with her hands folded and watches the square move from wall to wall. The calendar is gone. Time keeps its own count now. The story didn't end in that courtroom. It runs under the daily life of a town that learned how thin the distance is between promise and ruin. It lives in every warning we ignore because it arrives dressed as love. It waits in the silence after a door closes and the music stops. People will argue about motives until their voices wear down. Betrayal or obsession, possession or despair. But the lawn by the roses does not argue, it remembers. And the question that began on that bright April afternoon still lingers where vows once rose into the air and disappeared. Was it love? Was it vengeance? Or was it the quiet, ordinary truth that frightens us most? That a choice repeated long enough becomes a fate that looks exactly like our own hands. The chairs are gone now. The flowers have withered. The music has not returned to that lawn, but the story still breathes in the corners of this Texas town. In a coffee shop where someone lowers their voice when the names are spoken. In a newsroom archive where the footage waits for an anniversary. In the cold record of court transcripts that will outlast everyone who sat in that room. Jonathan Hale was meant to begin a new chapter that day. Rebecca Lane was meant to step into a future built for two. Danielle Ross had once believed she was the center of that same story. In her mind, the ending belonged to her alone. She had traded her freedom for his, carried his crime when it should have been his burden, waited behind bars for a promise that was already broken. And when the truth stood in the open air of that country club lawn, she chose to destroy it. 3 lives ended in one afternoon, 2 instantly in the space between a vow and a breath. 1 in the slow erosion of years that will all look the same inside a cell. People still debate her reasons. Some see a woman undone by betrayal. Others see a plan so calculated it left no room for chance. The truth may live somewhere in the space between, or in a place darker still, where love becomes possession and possession becomes a sentence no court has to write. If loyalty costs you your life, it was never loyalty. If love costs you your freedom, it was never love. We remember these stories not to dwell on the violence, but to see the warning before it arrives. Jonathan Hale is gone. Rebecca Lane is gone.